Hi, Peter Charles here, Hooked for Life Fly Fishing. And today I want to talk about a problem that often occurs when we cast for distance, especially with these new, very heavy, very short, very blunt tapered lines. And that involves head crashing and other nasty things happening to our fly line, so the fly line doesn't roll out dead straight. And what you normally find with these lines, and this is true of any fly line if you don't cast it correctly, but particularly with these heavy lines, is that at short to medium distances they roll out perfectly fine. But when you go long, we get what we call a head crash, which is where all the end of the fly line and the leader all ends up in a pile. Or we can get this hook at the end of our line, or we get a rebound where they come back and you get all these wiggles in your fly line. So I went out to the schoolyard with my Airflo Sniper line, an 8-weight sniper, on my NRX Plus 8-weight saltwater rod, and I actually cast with a tailwind just to show you that this isn't a wind problem. And I did some cast, and you'll see all three problems: the hook, the crash, and the wiggles. And then we're going to discuss why this is occurring and what we can do about it. So let's go look at the footage of me messing up some casts. Okay, I'm just out here in the schoolyard, and I'm going to show you what some of the problems you get into, and when we'll take the camera up there and have a look at the result. I'm casting the Airflo Sniper. I'm casting it quite a long way, and you'll see the effects we get into where you know, the head just ends up in a pile, or the leader ends up in a pile, and it's because I really don't have much of a fly on the end of it. It's just a piece of yarn, and I don't have anything with any drag. Okay, we're going to go have a look at that. Now, the important thing is I've got a tailwind, so the wind is working in my favor. It should straighten this thing out, but we're going to go down there and take a look at the mess that line landed up in. There you go. There's your typical head crash. You know, your leader's in a pile, the line's in a pile. You know, nothing is straight. You've lost roughly about 10 foot, if not more, distance because of that crash, and it's a problem we get into with these blunt tapered lines. Now we also get into problems with trying to apply too much power. So when you've got a combination of not very much of a way no fly, like I've got a piece of yarn on here, and you're applying too much power, you're going to get those head crashes very easily. And the trouble is, when you're going for distance, it's, you know, very, very typical that we're applying too much power. So the trick is you really have to slow down and let the line do the work and let the rod do the work to get this to roll over. So that one rolled over fairly well, and I backed right off, but I still got a little bit of curling in my line. It didn't lay out nice and straight, so without a big fly on the end to suck up some of the energy, you get recoiling, which is what happened there. I get a recoil come back as it goes out to full extension. You can get problems with yeah, that one hooked. It went off to the side like that. That's a classic example where you're going to get a bad cast and the line hooks too much power. And it's easy to develop too much power with these heavy, overweight, short, blunt tapered lines. And a lot of your control comes from having the big high drag fly on to suck up some of that energy. Because there's so much energy flowing through that fly line that when it gets to the end of the taper, it's still tons of energy left. So you get the head crashes. In this case, it just kicked off to my left, and you know, you've got a big hook in it. So these are the problems you run into when we're actually using the wrong line for the job if I'm going to be casting a tiny fly. So let's keep that in mind, that sometimes it's a misapplication of our gear that's causing the problem, and to try get rid of it with our casting, we end up working with this little tiny margin where we're trying to balance between the power of getting a nice clean turnover, getting distance, and not having problems. And when you're dealing with these heavy blunt tapered lines, that margin can be quite thin, and you're spending too much time worrying about your casting instead of your fishing. Okay, there's the results right there. Now, what was going on? What was the big thing? These lines are designed to cast big, heavy, wind-resistant flies like this pike fly. You know, this thing, let me get it the right way around. This thing is almost 6 inches long. It casts like a wet sock. These require a really beefy line. You know, you can get very big, very heavily weighted flies, I should say. There's a lot of aerodynamic drag in them. There's a lot of weight, especially with that fly when it gets wet. The rabbit strip soaks up so much water, it picks up an awful lot of weight. And if you're casting all of that into the wind, you need some oomph behind it. You need those big, heavy lines. One of the tricks we get into with it, though, is when we don't have a big fly like that, and we put a little fly on, that's when we get the head crashing. Now, what's going on here is that big, heavy, wet fly absorbs a lot of the casting energy. So it rolls out nice and smoothly when you have a big fly on. When you have a little tiny fly on that doesn't have much wind resistance, that energy starts flowing through that very short, compact, massive head, and there's no taper at the end of it to speak of, just a little short, 4 to 6 foot. And there's so much energy that when it gets to the end of it, it just crashes, or it hooks, or it rebounds. It does one of those things. And the thing is, use those lines appropriately with big flies. Now, you'll say to yourself, what happens if I'm out, let's say in Cape Cod, I'm casting a great big deceiver, and it's going beautiful, and then somebody yells, hey, there's peanut bunker out there, they're taking these little things. So you want to switch to a little fly, and you don't want to change lines. Well, the trick to that is if you have a 10-foot polyleader, salmon steelhead polyleader with a 20-pound core, loop that on the end, then tie your tippet on the end of that. There's enough mass in the polyleader to absorb a lot of the energy. So you can really smooth these out by adding a 10-foot polyleader to the front end, and then let's say 5 foot or 6 foot of tippet beyond that. And you'll get a lovely smooth cast out of a small fly. So that's the trick. And if you're going to go out with these lines, and you may be switching between big flies and little flies, carry a 10-foot salmon steelhead polyleader with you, and just loop it on when you need a small fly, and you'll get a beautifully smooth cast out of it. So keep that in mind. These lines are great. I love them. I use them all the time in Cape Cod, but you've got to make sure that you are using them appropriately. So give that a try. Cheers.